All right. Well, welcome back to Perspectives. To our followers, thank you so much for tuning in. And to our new listeners, welcome as always. Just to give a little bit of homework on Perspectives, myself, Jocelyn, and my boss, John, we talk about different human resources and industrial relations topics in the workplace from a millennial and a boomer point of view. We discuss topics like human rights and employment, harassment in the workplace, risk management solutions, unionization, how to avoid unionization, all that fun stuff. So today we're going to dive into the world of hiring new staff, which I know sounds a little strange in the pandemic, but as many furloughed employees struggle to make ends meet, we are actually predicting a bit of a hiring surplus in the upcoming months. So, John, do you think the hiring practices are one of those kind of stagnant, immovable procedures that every company will have to go through? I.e., you screen your resume, you call the person in for an interview, you maybe do a second interview, and then you potentially present an offer.
Well, as we know, the world has changed fairly dramatically. And without a doubt, I mean, we're going to be on to more and more online solutions as it relates to the hiring process itself. A lot of people have been choosing Indeed as an example in terms of using that as a platform for hiring, et cetera, and finding the right people. So we're not here so much to talk about that as much as, are you making the right choices when you in fact are indeed hiring somebody? So to Jocelyn's point, we are coming into a period where we're going to see a very, very sharp increase in the number of people who are going to literally put on the street. We're going to see permanent layoffs that are going to be occurring in a much more significant way. But with that in mind, it's also going to be creating another situation, which is, in many cases, the people who are going to be permanently laid off or actually leaving, they themselves are necessary for an organization to rebound back, as a result of all of a sudden the business starting to grow again. So what's going to happen is the hollowing out of the employee base, which may save some money in the short term, is actually going to become problematic in the longer term, because now we're going to discover that we actually have to go and start hiring replacements. And so it really behooves every company to really think carefully in terms of their strategies, not only in terms of how we go about hiring new people or people that perhaps are more qualified for what we're looking for, but also to take a look at what are we really doing with our existing workforce as well. And seriously considering that perhaps you do not want to make it so, how can I put it, opportunistic for people to say, I don't want to work here anymore, I'm out of here. But in our case, we're looking at it that there will be a lot of people who finally check out. They say, we've been at this since March last year. I'm still not getting income. I still have no recall date. I don't know if I'm ever coming back. And I think it's time for me to search out some new fortunes. And those people are going to be going.
Yeah.
And now we're going to have to replace them when all of a sudden we're going to be rebounding. And that is what I'm contemplating is going to be occurring probably by the end of Q1 of 2021. And now it becomes a matter of, okay, well, how are we going to do it? And what tools are we going to have at our disposal in order to do it? So online solutions are going to be front and center.
Well said. Online solutions, I want to jump on that a little bit because right now the main online solution that at least I'm seeing from my perspective are things like this: a Zoom call, a GoTo, a Google Meet, and you speak to people through your computer screen without ever having to come into contact with somebody. So do you think that, in the next couple of months, while people maybe are quitting or leaving and being disgruntled, looking for a new job, do you think the absence of the in-person interview and taking that interview on a computer, do you think that will affect businesses in the future or companies, or do you think it doesn't really matter if it's in person or not?
There's no question that the in-person interview is always great. I mean, when you take a look at body language of people when they're being interviewed, I mean, that's incredibly telling. The person who has got their arms crossed, or the person is excessively perspiring, or talking too much, all these things become indicators of probably a relationship you may not want to be having with that particular candidate. But we are going to be faced with the reality that the in-person interviews are just simply not going to be occurring in any frequency at all. And it then forces us to truly look at, all right, if we don't have the value of body language, which I always consider to be a really, really relevant part of the process of interviewing, then what do we have to work with? And now that takes us into the tools that we want to use online.
Well said. I have an example of that. So even here, like at HRIR, when we hired somebody over the summer, I interviewed, I don't know, 7 people through Google Meets and GoTo, and it was really challenging to be on the other side of that. I mean, it certainly presents a disadvantage to the candidate if they have bad Wi-Fi, if they have roommates, if they live with a partner, if they live in a small, who knows? There's so many factors that like are external that you can't control with that one-on-one interview process. That being said, in the hiring process that we had for HRIR, I did find a good candidate and she was spectacular. I mean, we got lucky, but to John's point, we did use external measures like online tools, like we administered her psychometric assessment and she passed with flying colors. And it was an interesting way, not that psychometric assessments are new, but it was an interesting way to kind of conduct the first stages of meeting and greeting somebody new into your company. And we got very lucky because, as you know, bad hires are the worst, and we didn't have that. So
we were lucky and we were fortunate because she was indeed great.
yeah.
And she probably is great, hopefully working with somebody else at this point in time after completing her assignment with us.
I'm sure she is. That segues into my next question because it's almost like we're giving her a little bit of a reference here for those of you who are listening who know what we're talking about and who we're talking about. But the online or the reference check process is something that is part of the hiring process. And it has been for a very long time. Do you think that reference checks are effective in the hiring process?
Well, this has been bee in my bonnet for many, many, many years. My experience has been that reference checks, I've never really been a fan of them. Probably the same way I've never really been a fan of resumes, even for that matter. When they're more than 2 pages long and they've got a picture of a person, and very quickly we discover all of our pet peeves because we each want to have those pet peeves when we look at a resume. But a reference check, I basically took it very much as I can almost anticipate what the feedback's going to be. Either I'm not going to get it because the referee's not available or doesn't want to do it, or ultimately what we get is nothing more than basically patronizing language of how great this person was, and it really doesn't help anything other than whoever's doing the hiring, that they can go back to the organization they're hiring on their behalf and say, hey, the references were great and everyone's done their job. Well, not necessarily. I think that there's many, many different ways that we can do it. And so as we're sort of picking through this whole process of hiring, it's important just to remember all the different ingredients. So now we have the resume, which really you want to have a very good understanding, because I consider that more to be something you leave behind as opposed to something that is a foundation for really making a decision. I mean, if anything, you probe all the gaps in a resume. But what really is important is that interview. And if the best that we're going to be doing is online, then certainly we're going to be wanting to script that properly, and that we can also have that degree of objectivity for all the candidates. That psychometric assessment, there's so many available out there, many of them available out there. I have in the past, when I had been a VP of Human Resources corporately, I had dismissed the idea because I found that some people were entrapped by the psychometric assessments. In other words, that's what they use as a final and only decision-making tool for hiring somebody. And I thought that really was appropriate. I think it's really part of the overall process, albeit a very important part. And then, of course, going right back to what Jocelyn's talking about, which is that famous reference check, which anybody could get a good reference for the most part, unless it's the supervisor who fired them, that they can expect no reference from that person. But there are different ways to go about doing that. And I think Jocelyn's going to probably talk a little bit about it, because there are some interesting, unique ways that we can approach that now.
Yeah. Well, thanks, John. I agree with you. I think 99% of the time, references are like a complete waste of time. So you call somebody, they say, oh yeah, that person was great. They were amazing. They were the best employee ever. times that by, 500 that you have to hire for for a large or even a medium-sized organization. But I do think the reference check process is not dead, and it should be something to consider as part of the overall hiring process, as John was saying. So the way that I look at this is, back when I was an HR administrator for Loblaws, we would have new people come in all the time. There was a lot of turnover. It's a huge company. And I was their first point of contact. So somebody who was hired, they would come in, they would give me their SIN number, they would give me their direct deposit form, they would give me all of this paperwork package that I would then type into a computer and upload it into our payroll and our HRMS system. So while I was there, Loblaws had a new initiative, and they decided to put the onus of the onboarding onto the actual new hire. So now they would send a link to an email address to the person that they're hiring. I would send a link to the person that Loblaws was hiring. The new hire would then input their name, their address, all that stuff on their own time and on their own computer. And so it actually took some time from my day, and it gave me more time to do other things, because you're putting the onus on the new employee. Well, the same can be said for reference checks. So there are systems out there that you actually put the onus of getting that reference check on the candidate. They input their references into the computer, send out correspondence to whoever their references are, and then the references 9 out of 10 times will write back a more honest and comprehensive response, because you're not catching them off guard. You're not catching like any kind of catch them in the middle of the day. They're not going to try to rush you off the phone, and you're giving more time to your HR or your hiring manager to do other things. So I think that the technological advancement and putting more accountability on candidates, on new hires, is not going anywhere. And I think that's something that employers should start to migrate towards. If you can do it for one aspect of the hiring process, which is the onboarding, why can't you do it for a different aspect of the hiring process, which is the reference check, even the psychometric assessment, right? They have to do that themselves. It's my food for thought.
100%. And those are all, again, interestingly, online solutions. So they do not require a lot of intervention on the part of the organization. It's nothing more than administering some very simple processes and then waiting for the information to be received. And now you can make an informed decision, particularly when you're having to do a comparison on a number of candidates at the same time. So where you have that opportunity to access that kind of a tool for any of those cases, be a psychometric assessment or a reference check, and that you can actually have it presented to you in a very thoughtful fashion and clear and precise, you'll be probably able to make a really good decision when you do finally hire that stellar star candidate that you wanted to.
Your superstar, because payroll is your largest cost center.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, John. It's always a pleasure to hear your perspective and your thoughts on different employer initiatives and different kind of topics in the employee management world. So thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. You can follow us on our social media channels. We post up-to-date new statutes, new compliances, interesting articles, as well as different videos in our Perspectives channel. So follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. That's HRIR. Thanks, everyone. Stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you.